everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with WashingtonExec, and joining me today is William Lietzau, Director of the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. Thank you so much for being with us today, Director.
Thank you, Amanda. Happy to be here.
Of course. So among your many other responsibilities as director of DCSA, I understand you oversee the vetting, the industrial engagement, counterintelligence support, and security training with a workforce of about 12,000 federal and contract personnel around the world. But I understand your career also has spanned both government and industry, including 27 years in the Marine Corps. So before we dive into establishing DCSA and leading its efforts, can you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to leading DCSA?
Sure. And that, I guess one would think that's the easiest softball question for an interview like this. But in my case, it's, I think I said in the beginning when I first took over that it was divine intervention that got me here. And a look at my biography would probably cause someone to agree with that, because while we've become the nation's biggest security agency in the industrial security and personnel security worlds, my background doesn't necessarily lead to those things at all. I wasn't looking for this job, wouldn't have come here. My background put me in a lot of leadership positions, from infantry to being a lawyer, as a policy person in DOD, and then running a business unit in industry. So all different organizational contexts. And as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, defense counsel, judge, none of those things necessarily lead here. But at the time, they were forming DCSA, and they needed somebody for a temporary job. Theoretically, they claimed they needed somebody with mergers and acquisitions experience. Had a little bit of that, but it's not quite the same in the corporate world. I'd call this more of an integration, because, we were formed by bringing a lot of, probably one of the biggest government transformations in the last decade or so. And so that's where they needed someone with expertise in forming organizations and starting them up. And by happenstance, a lot of my previous jobs put me in a place where there was something new or being created. So I was in a transformation office designed to oversee the merger. And that put me in this space. And then they said, hey, we need somebody to run the organization once we build it, so why don't you go ahead and do it? And I said, okay. And so that's how I got here. And I think it was that experience, which was maybe good for a first director, because the forming of the organization and the various integration efforts were as important as anything we were doing. But I think traditionally in the antecedent organizations that caused this one, you'd be looking at the security expertise and careers in that realm, as opposed to my background, which is more scattered.
Interesting. So what was your experience like leading the formation of DCSA, and what was your vision at the very start of it?
I guess coming into it with a change management mindset. I mean, we had a kind of a just to have an alliteration, we had a three-step program of transfer organizations to put them into one, transition them, your kind of low-hanging fruit, quick wins that make us into one organization, and then transformation, which is a little more extensive and takes us from the realm of just creating one organization that can internally run well, but into an organization that meets all the design features that those who decided to put us together wanted. In other words, why would we make the nation's largest security organization? Because we thought that those synergies would have it operate better in the counterintelligence realm, in the industrial security realm, in the personnel security realm, in the security training realm. All of those needed to operate better than they did before, when those entities were separate. And so our vision was to kind of make sure that happened, figure out what the end state should be to make it happen. And then there's all the more pedestrian things that every merger is involved in, making sure your back office support functions are up to snuff for the new set of people. For instance, do you have enough recruiters to recruit all the people that you need in this much larger organization? Do you have the finance people to now we have about $2.5 billion a year. Half of it comes from appropriations from the government. Half of it comes from revenue that we have to take in through a pricing model for our products. We get paid for them, and we have to make sure we remain in the black. Those capabilities in the back office functions weren't there for any of the previous organizations, so we had to make sure we built them. IT, the big ones that for any organization, I guess, are IT and finance, and getting those up and running was that was key as well. And then the last piece, I guess, it's related to all of them, is making sure we have an organizational culture that's going to drive us to that mission, the more optimized mission that those who decided to form us wanted. And that's always the hardest one to define. It takes a little longer. And it's harder to put a poem together that takes us through steps that get us to the grand new culture. But that was the vision, to have a culture of the nation's premier security agency. And I think that's what the last 3 or 4 years have been invested in.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you had quite the task in front of you when you took leadership. So in terms of transforming DCSA, what does the agency look like today? Give us a snapshot of that.
Yeah, it's pretty close to what we wanted it to be. I have to say there were hiccups in the way. COVID was not part of the plan. I didn't have that on that was not one of our milestones, for example. And then it's a matter of seizing the moment to make sure you've got that vision, make sure your people have that vision, and then they can use the events that happen to get to the same place. And I went off track a little bit from your question, but it just hit me. Giving that vision to our whole agency and collectively embracing it was what was important in the beginning, because then when COVID hit right at the beginning of my tenure, for example, the team used that, not me, but the team that was operating with that same vision, and they used it to move things from paper-based products to IT-based products and electronic products, so that, when we looked at before COVID, after COVID, we had warehouses full of files that are now not there, because they seized that moment. And while that might not have been in our sequence for transformation when we wanted it, we changed that sequence to adapt to the circumstances as they changed. So I would look at the agency now, and I would say we're kind of through the major transformation that was associated with my arrival and the forming of DCSA. We should always be transforming. This agency needs to. The threat out there is sufficiently scary that we ought to be constantly improving ourselves to meet that threat. That's the kind of agency we want to be. I think we are that agency. But then when you first form an agency from, we were 800-man organization to 10, 12,000 man organization, $800 million a year organization to $2.5 billion a year organization. That significant kind of transformation, you've got to both do it in a concerted way where you're focused on what you're doing, but you also can't do it in a instantaneous way, like ripping off a Band-Aid. It's too big of a change to do, on August 4th, we're going to do that transformation. You can't do it that way. You've got to have a phased program. That phased program to create us in the image we are now as one agency with those major mission sets, I'd say we're at the end of that transformational period, and we're into a sustainable transformation period to continue those missions, personnel security and industrial security.
You mentioned the culture shift being one of the most challenging, and I forgot that COVID happened during this time. But with the workforce so spread out around the world, how hard was it to transform culture during COVID at a global scale, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I will admit my previous leadership experiences, and it changes where you are in an organization, but I was used to getting around and meeting people and talking to people. And I remember that first kind of change of authority or like a change of command ceremony. And I was speaking to a camera lens, kind of like I am right now. I know you're on the other side of this lens, but it's different than going to somebody's desk and getting a real feel for what the current culture is and where the pain points are. We had to do that with surveys, more so than I might have in the previous situation. And we had to try to understand the cultures of the organizations that had come together. Several, maybe at least 3 major organizations came together, and then pieces of others. So we had 7 or 8 mission sets coming together to form one agency, understanding their previous cultures and capturing what was best about them. And then and then you asked how hard was it? It's always hard. It's always the hardest thing. It's perhaps the most important thing in any organization, because no matter what kind of leader you have, if you have a bad vision, a bad strategy, if you have a culture that drives people to perform in a way that's beneficial to that mission, the culture will drive itself. And even in the absence of a good leader or a good vision or a good strategy, you'll still have success. That's why the culture is so important. In this case, what made it a little bit easy is the values of the kind of employees we have at DCSA. I got to admit, I was just totally impressed when I went out to the field and I met the employees of this agency in all of our mission support areas, background investigations, counterintelligence agents, industrial security representatives, our training team, our educational team, our authorizing officials, and all of the back office mission support elements. I found a commitment to mission, to other people, to integrity, to selfless government service, which you don't see everywhere in government, and to innovation. Those are our core values, and those were core values that already existed in the employees here. So that was the glue that kind of held us together, was the common thread in the mosaic of the new organization. And that's what we kind of used as what tied us together. And it's worked very well.
All right, awesome. Well, in terms of the agency's relationships with industry, what do those look like, and how do those help with its overall efforts and its mission?
Yeah, in some ways, we should be the primary interlocutor with industry from the U.S. government for those areas in the National Industrial Security Program where we're doing classified work or work that is directly related to the security features of the nation. Part of that is because we do visits. We're the ones that authorize a facility to be cleared so that it can do classified work. We're the ones that provide the clearances and the investigations that animate those clearances for the personnel that are used in industry to do U.S. government work. And so that's and because of those, and then we kind of monitor the ability of those companies to continue to be secure, to continue meeting the intelligence threats, the foreign intelligence entities that are after us and those trying to steal our technologies. We're kind of constantly monitoring those corporate partners. You phrased it, though, as if, how does that help the DCSA mission? I think that's right, but in some ways it's a collaborative relationship, because we're helping industry meet its mission, which in all of those instances, the industrial partners I just described, they're building things or providing services that are necessary for the United States of America to maintain its position from a national security perspective. We need the F-35 to be built. And we need the scientists and the engineers and the technicians and the manufacturing group to be able to come together and build that aircraft or provide that service in order to posture us better from a national security perspective. So in some ways, we're then serving the company and back and forth so that we can build that entire national security enterprise. And I think that keeping that relationship in place is very important. Quick example just popped into my head. As COVID started, that was the unexpected thing. We were asked to reach out to some of the pharmaceutical companies. Most of them were not doing classified work for the U.S. government, but we were able to assist them as a liaison from government to be able to expedite the work they were doing in Operation Warp Speed to create a vaccine. and then not have it be stolen by adversaries who might have had malicious purposes in mind. That's, I guess, all I can say about the details of that, but that's the kind of relationship we have regularly. We share threat information, and we share best practices, and we look to monitor how well industry is doing in protecting their own technologies and ours as a government.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I mean, considering your experience and your expertise, in your opinion, what are the greatest threats to U.S. industrial security, and why should we as the public be concerned?
That's a great question. I guess I offered it up by saying it was scary, and it is. As coming into this role, I've been in the national security arena for more than 4 decades, and I've watched, having put on a uniform in the 1970s. At the end of the 70s, I saw a Soviet threat. I later moved into positions that put me in the center of fighting terrorism. And for about 2 decades, we sat there and we worked on threats to our national security that came from transnational armed groups through individuals, in many cases, terrorists. And that was an appropriate focus of attention. But while that was happening, we have a much more sophisticated competitor or set of competitors, if you will, and that can be a euphemism for adversary, that is absolutely committed to bringing us down, to gaining a position of supremacy in the world order that we have right now, and doing so knowing that we're starting as kind of king of the hill. And the best way to, for instance, on the technology side, advance their own technologies is not to build what we've built, not to put the same incentive structures in place and replicate the technological advancements that the United States has had. It's much easier to steal them and then build on top of them. Much smaller investment, too. And they were, while we were spending 2 decades fighting terrorists, they were gaining an expertise in doing just that. I often say Al-Qaeda had a lot of different plans. I'm familiar with quite a number of them. One of them was not getting people on the board of directors of some of our major corporations in the military-industrial base. But some of our foreign adversaries and near-peer competitors absolutely were doing that. And they were finding ways to use foreign influence and control and sometimes ownership of the corporations that are supplying that industrial base for the United States. If you go back to right now, we have the premier army in the United States, in the world. The United States does. But to give you an example, at the beginning of World War II, not at all. Our army was about the size of Portugal's or Belgium's. The end of World War II, no one could touch us. That's because we had an industrial base that could surge. And when we started building ships and aircraft and tanks and everything else that we needed to build the premier army in the world, nobody could touch us. We don't have quite the same industrial base lack of parity that we had back in the pre-World War II days or in the years immediately following it. So I'm worried about our defense supply chain for any kind of elongated conflict. I'm worried about technologies that are being stolen. And to my intelligence community kind of colleagues to my right and left in some of the other intelligence agencies, then there's the standard theft of intelligence information, the spycraft, and the potential for a revolutionary advancement in technology, for instance, through artificial intelligence. We always have to worry about that as well. So there's a lot to be worried about, and we need to be focused on it because we can become lackadaisical from having had a position of preeminence for a long time.
Makes sense. And like you said earlier, I understand the agency must keep transforming, especially to keep up with these threats. So what is on the horizon for DCSA? What does the near future look like for the agency?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're obviously still in we're going to continue building. We are as I look at my staff meeting for the senior leaders in this agency, and I compare it to 3 years ago, we're now a mature organization that's got some normalcy and the standard kinds of things that every organization has to deal with in reacting to the events outside of them. I think the key is going to be keeping that kind of strategic vision as to how we need to change and having a strategic plan that's looking out a number of years. In that regard, on the personnel security side of the house, we have something in the U.S. government called Trusted Workforce 2.0. It took us to a place where I often talk about my I was previously a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Rule of Law and Detainee Policy. My last trip to Guantanamo was the day that the Snowden leak had happened. And I had Senator Feinstein on the airplane with then Senator McCain talking about that data leak. It wasn't my world. I was a terrorist guy. But here we had a data leak of NSA data being put out by Mr. Snowden. And of course, it had far-reaching consequences that I would have never understood then. We're at a place now where we're better off because people who looked at that situation, or the Navy Yard shooter, or the hack into the OPM computer systems, they looked at that and said, we need to do our job better in putting trustworthy people in our workforce. And they started developing policies a decade ago that we're now in charge of implementing. We're doing well. We're on a good track. We've had an 80% speed improvement in the way we process an investigation. We've had a clear quality improvement through continuous vetting, and we've actually lowered prices now 4 times since I've been here. So better, faster, and cheaper is what we're doing on the personnel security side, but we've got a lot of implementation to go. We're still building the IT system that's going to be about $1 billion investment for the United States government. It is probably the most secure unclassified system that reaches out to a number of players. That implementation plan is still underway, and we have to keep doing it. On the industrial security side of the house, I think we're a little bit further behind. We're operating from a set of orders and regulations, in some cases that go back into the 90s, and we have a new position with respect to industrial security. And so we need to really think about, are we looking at the right things? Through cybersecurity, we have new ways of intruding into technologies that aren't just through people. The supply chain is much different. It's not food and fuel and building supplies. It now includes technologies. It includes software maybe made in China. It includes, there is no way to just buy all American and put that into our equipment manufacturing right now. So we have to think of ways of looking deeper into the supply chain, even to the unclassified portions of it, and how we're going to monitor that. Right now, we look at about 10,000 companies that do classified work for the U.S. government. When we expand in the near future to all those companies that also have large contracts with the U.S. Defense supply chain, we're kind of pushing it up to 150,000 companies. And we have to figure out how to resource that, how to leverage technology to better identify corporate changes as they're happening. So that's what the agency is in the middle of doing right now. And the last piece I'll say is the training piece too. We've got to, this is just like you see on the highways, see something, say something. This is not the agency is the security organization and we're going to keep America secure. No, it's a team sport. We call ourselves America's gatekeeper, but you can go back to medieval times. You can see the portcullis. I think it's behind me there. Well, no, I guess the camera doesn't show it, but it's in our emblem. And it's not the same today as just raising and lowering the gate to let the enemy in. The enemy's behind our lines already. We need everybody looking for them. And so we need training programs and educational programs that cut across the whole U.S. government and to our contractor workforce. Improving those is one of the other things you're going to see in the near future. But I'm very confident that DCSA is well postured to do all of that.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, Director, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for sharing a bit about the agency, its transformation, its mission and efforts. I really appreciate you being here today.
Well, thanks very much. I really appreciate the time.